morning. Welcome to another episode of In Conversation. Last week I gave you a bit of a heads up of where we were going this week, and this is going to be a bit more of an interview as I asked Jess a bit about her role. This week has been a bit of an odd week really, because I've spent most of my time on Zoom. On Monday we were in a conference that was about ministry in the diocese, and one of the big themes of my week so far has revolved around the word vocation and how the Church of England is trying to encourage more people to explore their vocation, which is their calling that God has given them. And that's been really interesting, because that's what I was going to talk to Jess about this evening and ask her about her vocation as an ordained minister and her vocation particularly to the current parish she's in. So thank you for agreeing for my idea.
That's okay.
So we've heard already in some of our conversations how you grew up in Leicester and you worshipped in a Methodist church as a child. Mm-hmm. You were then ordained in 2017.
Yeah.
As part of the Church of England. What led you to that shift from the Methodist church to the Anglican church?
So the joke answer is you, because Calum said that he wouldn't marry me if I was a Methodist.
And that was a joke.
It was a joke. But the real answer is my time at Chester, actually. So I don't know whether you know, but Chester has quite a rich Anglican heritage, and the university itself is one of the colleges which was first founded by the Church of England to train teachers back in the 1800s, I think. And during my time there, I got to experience a whole wealth of the Christian tradition that I perhaps hadn't really experienced prior to that. And it kind of happened by accident, really, I suppose. So I was exploring where I would make my spiritual home for my time at university, and I think I've mentioned before, thought I would kind of run away from Methodism or anything that kind of resembled it. And actually God brought me to the Church of England, which felt like I didn't actually move all that far. And it was only through worshipping in the local church while we were in Chester, and being part of the chaplaincy and meeting different people through that I got to experience the breadth, the generous orthodoxy, which is the words we used to bang around at college quite a lot. And that's the real thing that drew me in, I suppose. And so I was confirmed in 2013, I think it was. Yeah, 2013, into the Church of England by Bishop Keith in the University Chapel. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Great, thank you. Do you want to just kind of unpack very briefly what you mean by the term generous orthodoxy?
Yeah, so you may have heard it said that the Church of England is a broad church. And you may meet people who say they are Church of England but look and sound very different from each other. And generous orthodoxy, in its simplest, is basically saying that we hold all of these different traditions within the one tradition together, that we can have space for the Catholics and for the liberals and for the evangelicals and for everything in between. And that we do that in love, and we seek to flourish together as a tradition.
Great, thank you. I think it was it Rowan Williams or was it the former Bishop of London that coined that phrase, generous orthodoxy?
I think it was Rowan Williams. Great,
thank you. So you became an Anglican at university, as did I. I think our chaplain Ian Arch had quite a lot to do with that. And when he left and moved to the Cheshire Plains, I think Dot Gosling, who became chaplain after him, she was also quite instrumental in rooting us in the Anglican tradition, both of us. We got married just after I got ordained, and we moved up to the Wirral, mm-hmm. where you took on a placement year at a church, and then undertook training to ordination, so pre-ordination training in a church, and was then ordained 2017 and served post-ordination training at another church, which is what brought us over to Cheshire. Those two churches were quite similar.
Yeah. So I was in Oxton for my pre-ordination training and in Bowden for my post-ordination training. And both of those churches are in kind of suburban settings. They're quite large. And they offer what is now coined a kind of mixed economy model of church, which, a bit like generous orthodoxy, seeks to kind of hold all the best bits of our tradition together. So it offers a variety of different things, because we believe that, you know, people have different tastes and they meet with God in different ways. And so if we are to serve the parish in which we are set, then we should offer as many different ways to do that. And they were both actually in quite affluent places as well, but we're also kind of on the edge of quite poor places too, but we're quite removed and distant from those almost.
So talking in terms of vocation and calling, I guess the main reason for you being in those parishes was training. You were called to train there. Was there anything that you felt God was growing in you apart from training you for ministry? And was there anything kind of calling wise that was being developed whilst you were there? What were the kind of the things that grew your passions for God in those places? Yeah,
I think that was a question I certainly asked when I was in those places, largely because they felt like the kinds of places that were almost the polar opposite of what I'd first felt God call me to when I was 17 back in Leicester. And so I kind of often asked, you know, why here? Why me? Why now? They were the kind of three questions that I would always ask. And I guess a big thing was actually just about rooting me in the parish system. So when I first went through the process for ordination, I didn't feel called to be a parish priest. I didn't feel called to be a vicar of a church. Actually, I'd kind of run away from that idea quite a lot. And actually, my time in Oxton and then again in Bowden just revealed to me, I suppose, that I wasn't as bad at it as I thought I would be. But actually, God grew my heart for that kind of ministry. And particularly kind of what we call the occasional offices, so baptisms, weddings, funerals, those things that for some people are perhaps just a kind of bugbear and tick box exercise. Actually, they became really important aspects of my ministry, particularly post-ordination, which I now feel is kind of right at the heart of what I feel called to do.
Great, thank you. So you kind of felt you now have a calling to parish ministry. You weren't sure whether you had that calling when you were discerning training. You talked about where you thought God was leading you when you were 17 years old.
Yeah.
What was that? Can you remember?
Pretty much Stockport and Bridlington, but not that specific, obviously.
You've ruined the script.
Sorry. No, when I first felt called to ordination when I was 17, and I was still in the Methodist Church in Leicester back then. And I had a real heart for those on the fringes of church, and particularly for those who perhaps were on the outside of society as well. A kind of phrase that is bandied around a lot and that you will have heard at my licensing if you were there is the last, the least and the lost. Those who are often forgotten about or ignored and who don't always have a voice for themselves. That's what I first felt called to when I was 17, and so it took me by surprise that I pretty much ended up in two parishes that were not only affluent but were full of professionals and academics and people who definitely knew their own voice and used it quite a lot. Okay, so
Ogston in the posher part of Birkenhead, as posh as Birkenhead can get, and I can say that because I was in Wallasey, to Bowden, quite a posh area of Bramall, footballers. You have Marcus Rashford at one of your services.
Not Bramall, Altrincham.
Altrincham, sorry. Bowden and Altrincham. And now you're in the parish of Stockport and Bridlington, a new parish.
Yep.
A parish that I've learnt this week, and if you've watched our Christmas appeal video, is the 121st most deprived parish in the whole of the country. Mm-hmm. That's a big difference. That's a big change.
Yeah, huge difference. And I think I'm probably still getting my head around that. I had a moment today where I was kind of reminded that I'm no longer in Bowden. And
by today you mean yesterday, because it's going out tomorrow.
But those moments come quite thick and fast, actually. But actually I have that real sense of that this is what God called me to do when I was 17. And now, 11 years later, I'm finally doing it.
Okay, so you've been in Stockport and Brennington since July.
Yep.
I should know these things, and I kind of do, but there's a sense of doubt in me when I ask them. So a relatively short time, you're still getting your feet under the table, the metaphorical table, so to speak. COVID hasn't helped.
No.
What are the things you're sensing God calling you to do in those parishes already? That parish, I should say.
That parish indeed, yeah, it is one, even though it has 3 churches. So a large part of my role is among children and young people and in schools. And that is slowly but surely beginning to develop, although, as you say, COVID hasn't helped with that. But I guess more generally, there are 2 things that are sticking out to me at the moment, and I guess they've always been there in the background of my ministry. The first is to teach the Bible to people in a way that they can understand and apply to their lives. So I've just finished a 12-week course with a group of people where we looked at the Bible from beginning to end. And that was just a real encouragement as people who were new to faith were part of the group, but also people who had been going to church all their lives and who had kind of didn't know the Bible from one end to the other, or had certain books that they chose to avoid for certain reasons, largely because they just didn't understand it or they were scared of it. So that's one thing. And the second thing, which is kind of started to come to light through some of the stuff we're thinking of doing for Christmas particularly, is kind of community engagement, really, is kind of trying to bring as many different people from across the parish as a whole, not just the church, together to serve together, to work together, to have fun together, and ultimately from my perspective to kind of share Jesus with them, really, and to hopefully kind of bring a more cohesive parish, if you like. So as you said, we've kind of been recently joined together, and it would be great for us to see ourselves as one parish and not as the 3 separate churches, and not kind of the church exclusively over here and everything else over here.
Great, thank you. So that's a brief insight into Jess's vocational calling, from Methodism to Anglicanism, from chaplaincy to parish ministry, and then from Oxton and Bowden to where she is now, Stockport and Brennington. I'm currently reading a report that's been produced by the Clergy Support Trust that has been endorsed by people in the Church of England, because quite a lot of research has gone on over the last 10 years, and I guess we're starting to see the fruit of that now, to do with how can clergy thrive in ministry despite all the pressures. And one thing that seems to keep coming back to me, and certainly in some of the conversations we've been in together in conferences, is what has to be at the heart of any ministry is a vision, is a sense of purpose, is a sense of calling from God. And I think you may have already touched on this slightly. Could you maybe expand it a little bit? What are the key principles, visions, ideas that underpin your calling to your vocation to be a minister of God's word, to be a priest in God's church?
Yeah, so I think more generally it's about having a sense of peace, that I'm in the right place. I'm in that place where God wants me to be. And I found that, I think, much quicker this time than I perhaps did in the previous places. But I guess more specifically, it largely centres around people, actually. So a large reason why I felt called to ordination is because of people and my love for people, and my wanting to see people thrive. And I guess we were having a conversation earlier, weren't we, actually? We can often find ourselves in ministry doing those things that we didn't necessarily feel called to do, or we don't feel equipped to do. But
like sorting out the drains, for example.
Yeah, but actually we get on and do them, and we do them because they matter to the people who matter to us. And that's always got to be central, I think. And I think if we are putting the people whom we serve first, as frustrating as that sometimes can be, and as hard as that sometimes can be, there is a real joy in it. And I'm constantly reminded of the fact that this is a privilege and a gift to us, that it's not ours by right. People invite us to share in their lives and to share in their faith journey. And that is a huge gift and a real privilege that I hope I will never take for granted. And I think there's just something in the joy of that helps me to thrive in the things I'm doing, really.
Great, thank you. Slight curveball. Are there people out there who inspire you, who you might call heroes? If there are, feel free to name them, and then they can get all excited that they've been named in a In Conversation episode. Or if you don't want to name them, what is it about them that inspires you and cheers you on?
I don't think I am going to name people. That's probably a bit of a cop-out. But there are two main themes, I guess, in the people that I am picturing in my mind, and they are that they are just ordinary people living ordinary lives, but quite often doing extraordinary things for God without even realising it. So that's one thing.
You're so kind talking about me.
You're so humble. And now you throw me off track.
Sorry.
And the second thing is about longevity, is about those people who... So I have quite a lot of friends who are over 50, and that's quite unusual for somebody who is 28, but that's what comes from being in the church, I guess. But there is something in that about watching people who have committed to Christ for such a long time, who are still going with the journey, even though they themselves have faced real difficulties and trials, and yet can still proclaim Jesus as Lord, and still say that they are living the best possible life that they can have for themselves. So I guess it's those two things that kind of stick out to me most and inspire me to continue doing what I do.
Great, thanks, Jess. So that's a bit about Jess's ministry and her calling and vocation, and I kind of started that kind of whole conversation off when Jess was at university, in terms of what we've spoken about in this episode today. In the Church of England, there is a process for discerning vocation. It doesn't just happen like that overnight. And I think you started that process of vocation the year before you graduated university?
Formally, yeah.
Which was 2012.
Yeah.
And then you were ordained 2017. So that's a good 5 years. And you did various bits and pieces in that process.
Yeah.
For those people that might be sitting at home or wherever listening to this and thinking, well, how do I know whether God has called me to something, or how do I work out whether God is calling me to something? How do I understand what my vocation is? Mm-hmm. What would you say to them?
I would say to them, it takes time. So don't worry if you haven't worked out what it is yet. As Calum just said, it took me 5 years. It also takes a lot of testing. So asking a lot of questions and metaphorically pushing on a lot of doors. And then I'm about to say something which probably sounds like an oxymoron. And that is because it can probably be either or for people. So it's either something that it either comes from something that you are passionate about, skilled at, good at, comfortable with, or it's the complete opposite and you want to run away from it. And that sounds a bit odd, but actually it often is either or, but I think occasionally it's sometimes both and. And I think for me it was both and, but it took me the time to realise it. So at the start of the journey, it felt like the complete opposite. And the reason it took me so long is because I constantly ran away from it. but actually with the beautiful gift of hindsight, you know, now 11 years later, I realise it's those things that I was passionate about way back when.
Great. Thanks, Jess. We've been going on for 20 minutes now, so I think that's a good point to stop. So something slightly different this week. We hope that was helpful, maybe enjoyable, maybe thought-provoking. But that's it for today. I think you're hoping to do something similar with me next week.
Unless we come up with something else.
Unless we come up with something more interesting.
That's nothing against you.
And I'm sure we will come up with something far more interesting.
We might save that for a rainy day.
They're all rainy days at the moment. I'm just going to put a pitch out there. Yesterday, we launched our Christmas appeal at St Michael's, which is looking to support 3 brilliant causes in the local area. There's a video on our website. There's also a video on YouTube and on Facebook and even Instagram as well. So I'd encourage you, when you've kind of got another cup of tea or whatever, go and watch that. It's not 20 minutes long, it's only 8 minutes long, the video. And if you don't want to listen to me for 8 minutes, there's a summary on our website. But please do get involved with our Christmas appeal this year, if you possibly can. We'll be back next week, next Thursday, with something maybe similar, something maybe very different. Whatever you do until then, take care, God bless.